guys, welcome to the Radiate Your Faith podcast. My name is Maddie Walko, and I'm a college softball player from the great state of Texas. And I'm so excited that you are tuning into the Radiate Your Faith podcast, where I hope you are encouraged to let the light of Christ shine through you in a way that allows people to see God through the way that you walk with Him. My prayer for you is that your faith is deepened, that it is strengthened, and that you are encouraged to radiate your faith. Hey guys, welcome to the Radiate Your Faith podcast. I'm so excited that you guys are joining me for this week's episode. This week, I have on a very special guest. This is Taylor, and I'm going to go ahead and let her introduce herself to you guys.
Hi guys, my name's Taylor. I met Maddie through her current school because I'm her GA. We just met through that, and then now we're kind of friends, I feel like. I don't know if I'm supposed to say that because I'm technically kind of a coach, but at least when I'm done this year, we can still be friends.
Yeah, we talk about we talk about books a lot. Yeah, she read this book called Captivating, which if you guys haven't read Captivating, please go check it out because it is a book that completely changed my life. I read it because of my very first mentor.
It's one of those books that just has some content in it that just absolutely changes the way you think about God, changes the way you think about your life, and just how you react to things. I think it's really good for relationships and just other things like that. It's kind of like woman focused. So I think it's really beneficial to read at a young age, kind of where we're at right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a good book. But yes, Taylor is awesome GA, coolest GA, have the coolest GA on the podcast. So today's going to be fun. But before we get started, I would like to ask you, who is somebody in your life that you believe radiates faith?
I think my dad does a really good job of radiating his faith. He is just one of those people that when you look at him, you know he loves God. You know he's living his life for God. There's kind of an inside joke at his work. They call him the preacher just because he's like one of the only guys. He does food sales. And he's just one of those only guys that like doesn't swear. He won't go out after their like work meetings in Phoenix and go party with them. Like he's just one of those people that's really living it right and just will be really vocal about where he's at with God too.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think that's like, I've asked this question a couple times, but I think that's such a good point of like choosing to live your life set apart from people. Like that's really what I feel like makes people just radiate, their faith, their love for God. So that's awesome. All right, guys. So today's episode, or our topic for today, is going to be about perfectionism as opposed to living for God. And Taylor picked this topic. So would you like to share why you chose this topic today?
Totally. So I chose this topic because perfectionism is something I have truly struggled with for years. And I didn't get over that until I realized, or I guess not so much realized, but discovered that it's just so pivotal to truly live your life for God and no one else. You're not trying to impress anybody. You're not trying to impress yourself. But that kind of eliminates that perfectionism piece because you realize everybody's not perfect. Everyone makes mistakes. So trying to be that is impossible and you're just going to drive yourself crazy.
Yeah. And I even think too, like perfectionism is like this, it's like the false belief that like you have to do everything right for everything to work out the way you want it to. And at the end of the day, it's like, no, if we were perfect, like, then what's the need for a savior, right? And so whenever you believe that you have to be perfect, you're saying, oh, well, I believe I don't even need a savior to help me or fulfill me or any of these things. But I do definitely think it's something that a lot of people struggle with. Yeah. I personally I haven't really struggled with perfectionism necessarily like through softball stuff, but I have definitely like with people. Like if I'm friends with somebody and I feel like I let them down, I will beat myself up because I'm like, what's wrong with me? Why would I do that? All these things. But it's like, you're human, you're going to make mistakes, and there's grace for those things. And that's kind of where we got to look to Jesus. So with this perfectionism and living for Christ thing, where did all this stem from?
So I didn't have any sort of issue with perfectionism until I was in middle school. And I can tell you the exact day. I was in 7th grade. It was like middle of October. And it was a new school, so I hadn't done this before. And they had an award ceremony for grades. And my whole life I had been A's and B's. My parents only really required that we didn't get C's just because they felt it showed you weren't giving a lot of effort. And it was my first time getting all A's at this new school. I mean, it was also the first time I was there. But we had this award ceremony, and I didn't even know what my grades were. I didn't think I was going to get anything, but they call you downstage for like principal's honor roll with distinction because they're straight A's. And
Mm.
I was thrilled because
Oh
I
yeah.
got like a public award for being awesome.
She is
And
awesome. You deserve it.
from that moment on, I refused to get a B. And it then overlapped into other parts of my life, especially softball. And as you were saying with softball, you cannot be perfect.
You can't.
It's gonna happen. You're gonna fail.
It's a
And
game of failure.
oh, exactly, right? Like
Hmm.
it's you fail more than you win.
Hmm.
And then when I was in high school is kind of when it got bad. And I was like not eating if I struck out, or I was a catcher. So if someone stole on me, I wouldn't eat dinner. Like I would go home, I would shower, I would go into my room and I'd be done. I was like crying when things happened. Like I was a mess.
Hmm.
And it ended up getting so bad that I ended up in therapy. I ended up on antidepressants, and it was not a good phase of my life. And my parents would even sit me down and they're like, "Are you sure you want to play in college? Like, you seem to hate softball at this point." And I
Yeah.
was like, "No, I love it. Why would you say that? This is the best. I'm
Hmm.
just having so much fun." And anyway, obviously I was a mess. So one day my dad, he's like, "Let's have a conversation." Comes into my room and have you ever heard of World Magazine? It's like a faith-based magazine.
Mm-mm.
So my dad loves World Magazine. He gets it every month. And there was one story in it about the 2014 women's Olympic hockey team. They were studs. They were set to win. Everyone knew they were going to win. And in hockey, there's 3 periods. So they go into the third period, they're up 2-0. They end up losing 3-2 to Canada because everything just fell apart. And they're all in the locker room at the end of the game because they got bronze, or what's the second one? Not bronze, silver.
So,
They got silver. And they're all just like losing their minds in the locker room. Obviously, like you're in the championship game of the Olympics, like that's a big deal. And they're all just upset. And there's one girl who's just kind of like not like happy, but isn't like torn up like they are. And they ask her, they're like, "Do you just like not care?" She was like, "Well, no, like I gave it my best and that's all God wants from me." And like
hmm.
that was crazy for me.
Hmm.
And that kind of started my growth and my spiral in the correct direction. And so I think that's where like audience of one became so important to me and
Hmm.
kind of became the way that I live my life at this point.
Yeah, that's awesome. And that like in sharing that, that reminds me a lot of the OU softball team.
Mm-hmm.
They're pretty well known for their faith-based team. But one of the things that I love, I think I've talked about this on the podcast before, but there's their shortstop, her name's Grace Lyons. She's awesome, by the way. She would always, they had this like saying, and she would always say, give God your best and trust him with the
Yeah.
result, you know? And they would always say this, like, get out of the boat, like, get out of the boat and just trust Jesus, walk on water, all this stuff, which I think is so cool. And I definitely think sports give such a cool perspective on learning to
Yeah.
just trust God and give him your best with stuff. And even too, in you sharing that, like, I talk about this a lot whenever we talk about sports on the podcast too, but like, whenever we allow sports to become this all-consuming thing, like that can be really hard on you. And like you said, even to the extent of like not eating, like punishing yourself for not performing, like a lot of times in sports we see this core issue of, well, if I'm not doing this, if I'm not doing this, I have no worth. I need to punish myself because we've made it
Right.
this huge chunk of our identity where Christ needs to be. And so I think like the key to letting go of perfectionism is learning to love God more than you love anything. Loving God more than you love softball. Loving God more than you even love your performance. Like
Mm.
giving that to him, playing for him and giving your best, like that's really like the core of choosing to like live for him.
I think it's pivotal to have that shift, especially if you're in athletics. Because athletics, like, it teaches you so much
Mm-hmm.
for life, for jobs, for just anything like that, but it can totally tear you down too. And I think the verse that really took me out of it was Colossians 3:23 and 24, which I feel like it's just such a basic verse that you hear all the time. But then when you truly like dive into it and try and digest what it's saying, it can just shift you. Because when I read it after hearing Audience of One, when you see the end of it where it's like, for the Lord and not for men. Everyone thinks like, oh yeah, doing everything wholeheartedly for God, great. But that not for men, I think is what I needed to really hear,
Mm-hmm.
because I wanted to be the best because I wanted people to think I was awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Because the high school I was at was super small, and
Mm-hmm.
so our athletics were not good. So everybody already thought like I was a stud because I was the only person who had played like club or anything before. But I wanted them to think that I was just amazing, and I wanted them to like idolize me. Like it was just
Mm-hmm.
not a healthy
Yeah.
relationship. It was not a healthy place to be in. And so hearing that, I was like, okay, like I'm not playing because I want everyone to think I'm great. I'm
Mm-hmm.
playing because God gave me this ability to play. So I'm going to give it my absolute best
Mm-hmm.
because that's what he wants from me.
Yeah. And that's all you can do, right?
Right.
Like, I even think of, so my freshman year of college, we went to the national tournament, which was awesome, by the way. That's like one of the coolest experiences of my life. And we were at the national championship game, and I think we were down like 3-0. I got put in like the third inning, and I pitched my tail off. I pitched the best I could, and I remember I had taken a pen, so cheesy of me. I took a pen and wrote my best on my arm. And so usually like whenever I'm pitching, I kind of just, go out there, throw the pitch, whatever. I think about getting the 3 outs for the inning, not wanting anyone to score, right?
Yeah.
But that day was so different because I remember I was out there and every single pitch before I threw it, I said, God, I'm giving you my best pitch. And that's what I did. And we actually ended up losing um 3-2 or something. We'd lost by one. I didn't allow any
That's
runs,
good.
but we were still lost by one. And it was one of those things where I like, even though we got second at the championship, it's one of those things where it's like I know that I gave God my best every single pitch. So how can I be disappointed in the result? Like, and I think that's one of the humbling things is like when you give God your best and you don't have any regrets about what you've done, even if you lose and that's what God chooses for you, like if that's ultimately what he is choosing to give him the most glory, why would I not want it?
Right.
And I think that's like a very humbling thing to experience.
Yeah, it totally is. I think that's a great way to put it. Just that as soon as you know you're giving him your best, that outcome, you know you have no control over it.
Mm-hmm.
And you know that outcome is 100% from him, which I mean, it obviously already is,
Mm-hmm.
but you at least feel that.
Yeah.
And then you accept it because you know that. But I
Mm-hmm.
think you writing on your arm reminds me, I got a tattoo of Audience of One on my left hand because I was a catcher, and it was the hand I saw when I did everything. And I needed that visual reminder, and I need it in life. That's why I have it in a place that I can see it. But it's just one of those things I'm going to have to focus on and have intention with looking at.
Mm-hmm. Well, and even with the Audience of One thing too, I think about how a lot of like with softball, like people struggle to like, oh, they'll play to please their coach,
Yeah.
or they'll play to not get talked about bad on the team, or like there's all these different reasons why
Mm-hmm.
people play. But again, ultimately, like choosing to play for God is like the most freeing thing in the world.
Yeah.
But you have to be careful. And I say this because during my recruiting process, I got recruited by a big school, like a big school. And I remember being like, oh, well, if I go there, like I can go have this big platform to talk about Jesus. Like, how cool is that?
Mm-hmm.
But I knew deep down the intent of my heart was off. And it's really hard to admit that, but it's so true because I was like, oh, well, I could go talk about Jesus on this platform. But it was like I was going to play for my glory in God's name rather than play
Mm-hmm.
for God's glory, like in his name. Like I was saying, oh, I'm doing this for God, but deep down in my heart, I was doing it for me, or as opposed to like just playing for him and wanting it to be all about him. And again, that's a really like hard and humbling thing to say, but I feel like that's kind of how we're wired. Like that's what we want is like the sinful nature in our hearts that wants all of the glory and the praise to come to us. Um, but like what does that do?
Right.
What does it do? It doesn't change anything. If you get all the glory, then what? But sharing Jesus, talking about Jesus, having a platform to just love him, like that changes everything. Not just for you, but for the people around you. And it's like,
Right.
why would you not want that?
Yeah. And do you feel like now, like looking back, the people you have around you here give you, like, you still have that platform? Do you?
Oh my gosh, I could cry. Yes, after the recruiting process was over, I ended up choosing a different school because I knew my heart intent was off. And I also just felt like God was pointing me in the direction of here.
Yeah.
And it's so completely evident that God has such a cool platform with this team. Like walking in first week, we started a Bible study, which is
Yeah.
completely different from the year before because our team kind of had a messy year, but the year before I transferred here. And it's just like this whole team is just a ministry opportunity. And it's so evident that God has just softened people's hearts and moved on this team to really like give him the glory for people to learn that he is more important than softball and just
Right.
that the people around you are always going to be your ministry, not your performance. So it's pretty awesome. Oh, I love this team. This team's awesome.
Yeah.
But yeah. So any last points before we end the podcast?
I do want to say one thing tying into how you just kind of talked about the team. I went to a private Christian college, and I feel like this team is more proud of their faith and proud of their relationship with God and vocal, and just like visually you can see that they're working towards a better relationship with God than 90% of my team in college.
Mm,
And I just love the impact I feel like you have had on them and your roommates have had on this team.
mm,
I love the fact that you guys say for him before the game because you're proud of it, not because it's something that your school makes you do.
mhm,
And I just love the way that this team has started living for God and playing for God truly. And I think that's part of why I chose this topic, just because it's something that I see every day now.
mhm.
But yeah, I just love the impact you've had on this team.
Oh,
Yeah.
thanks. Oh, yeah, it's been this whole team, this whole experience has been just one of the coolest Jesus things I've gotten to walk through in my life, and I definitely don't take it for granted. Like even just there's some girls on our team who never even knew Christ that are
Yeah.
coming and they're like, "Do you want to pray with me before the game? Like I want to make sure that I'm playing for him this game and just having fun and all that." And I'm like, "That was not you like
Mhm.
5, 6, 7 months ago." Like
Yeah.
it God moves so quickly and it's just so cool. So yeah, I love this team. I love you get to be here. She's the best GA, guys. So
Thanks.
fun. All right. Well, I hope you guys loved this episode. Don't forget to check us out on Instagram, YouTube, Spotify, all the things, or get some merch off of our website. But I really hope you guys enjoyed this episode and that you learned something and that you were encouraged to radiate your faith.